evening. My name is Julie Mignone, and I'm currently the president of the Cowley County Historical Society Museum. And that really does not qualify me to be part of a tornado program. In fact, I was 4 years old in 1955. We lived in Ark City. But my dad, Ray Taylor, worked as an embalmer and ambulance driver for Rent Erdman Funeral Home, and of course he answered the call to go to Udall. In the World War II, he had been in the Navy serving as a surgeon's mate on the hospital ships that followed the combat ships. So he saw lots of terrible injuries, lots of desperation in faces and trauma and fear. And I know he saw some of those same things when he went to Udall that night. But I gotta tell you, when he came home from all of that, and he and Mother talked about those experiences, he made sure none of us kids were around. We did not need that trauma in our lives. He did not ever want to see that kind of fear on our faces. So I knew nothing about it. So it sounds again like maybe I shouldn't have anything to do with this program. However, 40-some years later, when Udall decided they were ready to have a historical society and museum, I was married to Paul Satterthwaite, and his parents, Fred and Lois Satterthwaite, were retired and were leaders of Udall. They had lived there, both lived there all their lives. So they were part of the board, part of the group that designed the plan for the museum. They got a building. They knew exactly where they needed it to be and the space they were going to use. They had a lobby, and on one side of the lobby was the museum. On the other side was a room, not a large room, a medium-sized room, that was the city library. So after they started making plans, a lot of the residents started coming to them and to the other board members, worrying about the effect it would have on the people in town about the tornado being part of the museum. The trauma was still there. The nightmares would probably recur. And they said they knew their family would not come to visit the museum if it showed a lot of the tornado disaster. Well, the board had to be sensitive to that. They had to appreciate that kind of feeling and, of course, back off from some of the plans they had for the museum. Then they considered the other patrons that they would want to visit the museum, and that would be the school children that could come for field trips, that could come and learn about the families in the museum. And the tornado was a part of that history. And we don't believe in rewriting history because it was uncomfortable. But we couldn't make it that uncomfortable. I wasn't part of the planning, really. I was the teacher they knew, and I was the one that suggested maybe they could just have an educational corner, clear back in the back part of the museum that could be avoided if people wanted to avoid it. That was just facts about tornadoes, not connecting it to Udall tornado, not connecting it to the destruction they had lived through and the terrifying time that they could remember all too well. And maybe with just facts, the kids could get an idea of what a tornado, how powerful it could be, and what it would do to a town, not just to Udall. So I made posters. I made big tornado-shaped posters and lined them up at the top of the wall, up by the ceiling. They never came down to the ground where they would cause destruction. They were just at the top, and it told the facts of what a tornado was made of and what speed it could have and how they rated them and where they started and how they started, and just lots of facts about tornadoes. I also had posters and placards about some instruments that they could use, and some instruments that were there, some barometric pressure instruments and some other weather instruments that they could experience with hands-on, and some ideas that they could take home, like counting the chirps of a cricket to see what the temperature is, or counting the seconds from the lightning to the thunder to see how far away the storm was. And I made a dozen of those big 2-liter bottle things that you could make a funnel in with water. And I always hesitated showing that to kids because tornadoes weren't made of water. They could pick up water, but it showed water, and I always hoped there was an adult or a teacher there that would say, this just shows a funnel, but water is not what a tornado is made out of. Tornado is made of wind and wind pressure. Anyway, it had lots of things like that for the kids to see and use and learn about tornadoes. So evidently that was acceptable to most of the people in the town. And that's how the museum started and opened, with collections of families and a little bitty bit about the tornado. So that's really my only connection to tonight. And the rest of the program tonight will be much more informative. JoAnn Parsons has a PowerPoint and a lot of things to tell you. And then after her presentation, we hope to have at least half an hour for any of you that have stories connected to Udall and would like to share them. JoAnn Parsons.
Just to warn you, I'm going to set my timer so I will get stopped in time for your stories. Because we really want today to be a lot about your memories and recollections. Growing up, I heard so many stories. Like every person that lived in Cowley County that my family was acquainted with had some story. And so that's how we're going to start out. So this, some of you may have seen this first picture of the newspaper. That was the day after the tornado, 59 dead. There were, they hadn't, by the time the paper went to press, they still, I think, were finding more people, but then some people lived for a few days or a few weeks and then passed away, so that changed. But in doing research, and I primarily researched the Ark City Traveler and the Winfield Courier for just the week after the tornado. Plus I had read Jim Minnick's book, and let me tell you, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories just in that short period of time, let alone in the months and years afterwards. I think you could have a talk, a presentation that could last days. And so we just picked a few stories for today. Can you give me the next slide, please? So this is a picture from 1921, I think it is.
1920.
Yeah,
1920. Just an aerial photo of what Udall looked like. I didn't find any pictures that were closer to 1955 without having to pay $35 off the internet. And so you can tell that probably the houses probably got closer together before 1955. A lot of those had, kind of some acreage with the houses. And I included a picture of the Udall water tower because it was an important landmark in Udall, and it also was, unfortunately, the cause of several drownings. People in storm shelters, when the water came in the storm shelters and on the streets. So let's go ahead and look at the next one. This is a map. The first, well, first of all, the storm system started in Texas and was huge. At one point, it was the storm supercell covered the entire state of Oklahoma, so it was a big storm. And it started down here south of Tonkawa, and this one hit Blackwell, and they lost, I think, lost several people, and fortunately, it was on the east side of Blackwell, so it was a small area, and then it kind of, it ended near South Haven, not much damage. And this one, the second tornado that same night, started and it went up this way. So this one was an hour before it hit Udall, and it wound around here, and that was the path of the tornado that night. And then, okay, so not going to dwell an awful lot on the gruesome part of the tornado. A lot of you know about that. I would say that before I had not read it until I read the book and started looking through newspapers that the 5 children that died just slightly north of Oxford were 5 of 10 kids from one family. And the mom was there with them alone because the dad was in a tuberculosis asylum. And so there aren't 100 cars in that picture of the car. They called it the car graveyard. But there were approximately 100 cars totally demolished. And this was a picture, just kind of a picture of what Udall looked like. And honestly, when I saw the pictures of Grinnell, Kansas this morning, it looked a lot the same. Very sad. One report estimated that the first help arrived around 11 o'clock. Tornado hit about 10:35 in Udall. 25 minutes after the tornado had passed. I read and heard differing reports about who was first to come to help. At this point, I don't think it matters who came first. What matters is that people came. And this was a good time to point out, of course, after the tornado, there was no phone service, and so people couldn't call out for help. One Courier newspaper reports that the motorists coming through Udall from Wichita immediately after the storm noticed that there were no lights in Udall. And then they saw the enormous devastation and debris. One particular car raced to Udall, from Udall to Winfield, to notify the police department. The reports of the devastation were so drastic that initially the police department just thought they were trying to pull a joke. But almost immediately other people were coming in to report it, and so they were convinced that indeed a terrible tornado had struck Udall. I'm not sure I started my timer. No, I didn't actually start. I thought about it and then didn't. Okay, so when you hear the tornado, when you hear the timer go off, it's not a tornado. Area law enforcement responded immediately. Police, sheriff, and highway patrol from Winfield, Ark City, Burden, Wellington, and elsewhere. Ambulance services transported the injured to 7 hospitals. At that time, Winfield had William Newton Hospital and St. Mary's, St. Luke's Hospital in Wellington, and 3 Wichita hospitals. And I noted that the Ark City Traveler said at some point they had 9 victims in their hospital. I'm not sure if they were from Blackwell or from Udall. It would be impossible for me to list all the residents, volunteers, and officials who were absolute saviors, heroes, and lifesavers. The medical community was phenomenal at every level. Specifically, one press release highlights the involvement of Winfield, Wellington, and Wichita, and highly praised them. The Red Cross, including individuals from Ark City and Winfield, were on the scene before daylight. This was also true for 500 area National Guardsmen and more than 100 airmen from McConnell Air Force Base. The number of workers on hand increased as the day progressed. Individuals not necessarily connected to any particular group showed up to help and to search for victims and for the deceased. Next slide, please. So just looking at headlines here, the storms hit in other Cowley County areas. Some of you possibly will have connections to that. I grew up 14 miles south of Udall near the Arkansas River. The tornado was passing through 2 miles west of where I grew up. Salvation Army is hard at work, National Guard. There are all kinds of groups there. Okay, let's look at the next slide at this time too. 500 families are in need of disaster aid, and that was Blackwell and Udall. Ark City was made a disaster headquarters because they were partway between Blackwell and Udall. and of course, an article about the Red Cross. It was still raining after the tornado, sometimes quite heavily and often on hail for the next few hours after the tornado passed. Searchers were wet and muddy. One Winfield merchant, and the Prairie did not say who, early the next day sent 200 pairs of dry socks for the National Guardsmen and others that were helping. And of course, Udall lost electricity in addition to the phone service. Phone and electric lines were all above ground in 1955. The lines were down and damaged for miles and miles. My folks had no phone service. Poles were down. Temporary lines were connected from Wichita to Udall the very next day, possibly just to the city response headquarters. I saw pictures of the city of Winfield electric crew were stringing up temporary lines within days. I saw online one picture of several linemen on several poles all at the same time. I'm guessing this was before the use of bucket trucks. I want to share a story that I heard at Betty Harris's memorial service a year or so ago. The William Newton School of Nursing in Winfield loaded up nursing students, reportedly in the back of a wheat truck, and to go to Udall just hours after the storm under the cover of darkness. They performed various duties with regard to the injured, and they were also tagging deceased victims. It was here, in the midst of the debris and devastation, chaos, that Betty Harris, still a nursing student, not yet an RN, told of delivering her first baby. Wow. In a wheat field. Presumably, the mother and child survived. I've never heard any more about that story. The day after the tornado, May 26th, Mennonites from Halstead had 600 volunteers ready to provide aid. Their initial plan was to send 100 per day, searching for victims and retrieving salvageable belongings. By Sunday, May 29th, they had exceeded their original plan and had 300 men working in Udall. In all, in a period of several weeks, over 1,000 Mennonites from different states came to help. They continued to volunteer for months in a variety of ways, including helping with new construction. According to Jim Minnick's book, in December, the Mennonite women gave Udall residents, those who were now in new homes, hygiene kits, one per person. In Kansas and Oklahoma, a total of 2,000 kits with soap, a washcloth, toothbrush, and toothpaste were handed out. They also gave out 225 blankets to families in both tornado-stricken cities. As the word of extreme need spread, the response was immediate. Nearby communities, as well as the entire state of Kansas, began donating the very next day. Money was given, clothing, shoes, food was pouring in by the truckloads. And from some of the pictures I've seen, and we're not talking pickups, we're talking like wheat trucks. The Udall residents' belongings had been blown away, including clothing. In some cases, the 300-mile-per-hour winds had totally torn the clothing off of the victims. Nearby towns were also collection sites in addition to Winfield. The Bennett home, 1 mile south of Udall, quickly became a distribution site for victims to get clothing. Most survivors had no shoes at all. Monetary donations were pouring in too. And let's look at the picture. This next picture is from the second day after the tornado, and you can tell that's a whole lot of clothes. But people were just amazing. In the newspapers that I read, almost every church in town was collecting clothing and giving, to accepting donations. They were, people were bringing in food. And then this picture, it says is a St. John's Gym, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Right here.
I think the St. John's Gym was right here at that time.
Yes.
And so Judy had helped me with that. So it also talked about that Tisdale, I read that Tisdale, the Tisdale Gym became a site to sort clothing out before they sent it to the Benetton south of Udall. The Armory in Winfield on May 26 became a canteen preparing and delivering meals to storm refugees, volunteers working in Udall, airmen, and other workers. Several canteens run by other groups opened in Udall in the following days, mostly in tents. And the next picture, please. I've read different things. I'm not sure if this building that became the headquarters was put up the very next day or the second day, but still pretty amazing. This is a Traveler, a story from the Ark City Traveler. This says in May 27th, 2 days after the tornado, an operations center was constructed by 35 members of the Wichita Home Builders Association. In just 6 hours, they had the walls and roof over a concrete slab, which had previously been the community building. 40 foot by 80 foot, it soon housed offices for emergency response, a volunteer labor office, the mayor, Salvation Army, Red Cross, Civil Defense, and a federal finance corporation. It was also a collection site for lost and found items. The most common items turned in were small items, dentures, and eyeglasses, both of which you would very much want. We're starting to be telepathic. So Udall will start rebuilding. They had an announcement just immediately, like some people were saying just forget Udall, and the mayor in particular and other people were saying no, we want Udall to rebuild. A Wichita TV station announced that roads were open to Udall, unbeknownst to the local officials. This was within a couple days. I'm not sure of the exact date. This was a good thing and a bad thing. The traffic hampered cleanup. The TV stations had encouraged people to bring monetary donations. Two-lane traffic was bumper to bumper for the 7 miles from Mulvane to Udall. Someone reported it took 3.5 hours to get from Wichita to Udall. The traffic coming to Udall from the east was just as crazy. I'm going to speculate coming from the south was just as bad. National Guardsmen and civil defensemen wearing identifiable headgear were holding donation buckets along the road. The Kansas Highway Patrol did their best to manage traffic, but due to the long lines, cars were stalling, and there were a few vehicle smash-ups. On one particular day alone, according to Jim Minnick's book, $8,000 was collected. Over time, the bucket total increased significantly. Jim Minnick said donations in Udall in 1923 would have been worth $100,000. In 2023.
Oh,
20, sorry if I said that wrong. Thanks for catching that. Next slide, please. Oh, let's go back one. Can we do that?
No, back, you're going the other way.
Whoops,
Okay, that's forward.
hang on.
Well, I thought it was rather significant. There was just a little bitty article on this, but the Winfield Board of Education with Herbert Hawk, I know a lot of you have heard that name, met with the Board of Education. And on,
That's it.
yeah, on May 30th of 1955, they went to, they told Udall, Whittier, most of Whittier building is complete. It wasn't open to Winfield students yet, as if I interpreted this little tiny article. They said, we'll offer temporary or permanent classrooms for Udall. Now, the good news for Udall is they were able to get along without it, but I thought I was so proud of Winfield for doing that. The Udall High School in early September had enough completed classrooms to begin the year even while construction was continuing on their building. This whole thing, some of you were here in February when we talked about the Winfield not having a high school building and being all over town. Well, this made me think we were a bunch of whiny babies. Here's a little tidbit I thought was interesting. The Udall bank vault, including the safety deposit boxes, were found the day after the tornado. Reportedly, the bank, such as it was, opened the very next day. Pretty cool. The Courier reported that some Winfield Girl Scouts adopted a 5-year-old girl from Udall in the St. Mary's Hospital. The Scouts took turns going to visit her during her very long hospital stay. Her mother had died in the tornado. I'm going to speculate that her dad was working. Her siblings were in critical condition at the other hospital in Winfield. So these girls, I know when I was a kid, you couldn't go to the hospital until visit anybody until you were 14. Was it 12? And so they had special permission to go and visit her. She had lost part of her foot, and so they had a plan. They were going to raise money to buy a prosthetic foot for her when she was healed enough for that and was far enough along to be able to be released from the hospital. Some of the members of the town council died in the tornado. The surviving members and the mayor were incredible, stepping up and above and beyond what they had initially signed up for prior to the tornado. They were a force almost beyond imagination. They had a goal for rebuilding their city even before the debris was cleared. The details were monumental, and the process was not complete even a year out. However, dozens of homes had been built even before school started in September of 1955. The building continued with homes, businesses, and churches. The tornado had been extremely catastrophic and traumatic, but they moved forward. By sheer will and a cooperative vision that evolved as they progressed, they forged onward. With an indomitable spirit and tremendously hard work, they rebuilt their city. Not all families returned to Udall, but many did, and additional residents moved in over time. Udall was already a close-knit community before the tornado, but afterwards they became even more unified, a bigger family of sorts. Neighbors had helped neighbors and continued to do so. Nearby communities and those far away had proved to be invaluable resources. Udall never forgot the aid and assistance that they received in the 1950s. Numerous times over the last 70 years, Udall has organized aid for other tornado-stricken communities. With a busload of workers and tools, they have gone to help other disaster cleanups. They have shared messages of condolences, encouragement, and understanding. After the Greensburg tornado, Udall gave money for trees, and they also donated trees. Not only that, they helped plant trees during 4 different trips. In closing, I am reminded of Pastor Fred Rogers of the children's show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He said that after a disaster, we should look for the helpers. Udall had helpers. No act of kindness is ever wasted. So I have, that actually worked out about where I wanted it to. So I'm ready for Julie. This I thought I would do
It is no doubt that the volunteering, the rescue, and all of the people interested in helping Udall citizens and the rebuilding is the glory part of that story and deserves to be. Okay, we'd like to hear some stories now. I'm going to start first with a story that is written by Glenda Schmidt. Her family lives south of Udall, and as you listen to this, I think I can read it. Feel it in your heart and in your soul. I mean, that's what led the board of directors of the museum and Udall to postpone their big plan of including the tornado in their museum originally. So I know you'll feel this too, and rightfully so. So Glenda says, I was 3 years old on May 25, 1955, when the tornado struck Udall, Kansas. I lived on a farm 1.5 miles straight south of Udall with my parents and my brother Roger, who would turn 1 year old a little more than a week later. We lived in a Victorian farmhouse with a basement that had been hand dug by my parents a year or so earlier. My mother had intended to take me and my brother to Eileen, and I'm going to say this wrong, Holchi wedding shower at the community building, but Roger wasn't feeling well, so we stayed home. We had no phone or television and relied only on our own weather observations. When the wind started to pick up, we went down to this small basement and sat on kitchen chairs. I cried for my favorite doll, and Dad went all the way up to the second floor playroom to bring her doll down to me, to bring her down to me. He remarked to Mom that he couldn't see the barn, and that the latch to the back porch door had broken. We could hear the door flapping in the wind. I can still remember the freight train sound as the tornado passed over us, and then the eerie calm before the wind screamed around again. Dad drove us up to our neighbors, Ray and Geraldine Evans, and their son Gary, about 8 or 9 years old, who lived on the other side of the section straight north of us. They were standing in their yard, dazed. I remember seeing much mud, little vegetation, and no buildings. The Evans had been in the basement of their farmhouse and escaped with few injuries. My brother remembers that Dad told him the sofa, rug, and a few other small things were still in place in the living room, but that all the walls and the roof were gone. I found a small rubber Santa in the mud and picked it up. My mother told me it wasn't mine, to keep and to leave it. Mrs. Evans said, "Honey, you just keep that." My other memory is that Mom dug out a quilt from the mud, later washed it and gave it back to Mrs. Evans. My brother said that all of Ray's vehicles had been damaged in some way and were unable to be driven. The Evans had a dairy farm, and that, along with their house, all their outbuildings were gone. They got in the car with us, and my father drove us on into Udall. Upon entering Udall, my dad would later say that the sound of people honking their horns to call for help and the cries of those who had been injured upset me, and he turned around driving toward Winfield on County 3. Dad said the highway was a steady stream of cars, ambulances, and other rescue vehicles going toward Udall. We reached my grandparents' house 3 miles west of Winfield and spent the night along with the Evans family. We all stayed at my grandparents' house for several days as there was no electricity at our house. When the electricity came back on, the Evans family lived with us until they got a prefab house placed at their farm. Roger said that our father turned under the remaining wheat crop and let the cows out on it, as the pasture north of the house was littered with debris from the chicken house, brooder house, granary, and barn. We neither one remember the status of the cows. only that our milk cow Brownie survived. Using his wheat truck, Dad said he fixed at least one flat tire a day for several months as he and Ray Evans cleared the ground of tornado wreckage clear up to the Evans farm. Thank you, Glenda, for sharing that with us. Now, if anybody else is ready to share, I'd love for you to hold that if you want. Or I
Yeah,
can.
well, I've got not enough mouth. My husband tells me I have a lot of enough mouth without an assistant here, but, excuse me. You brought up Girl Scouts, and I was a senior Girl Scout at that time. 14-and-a-half-year-old senior scout. And along with some of my best friends, we were having a slumber party. I think that the next day or two was the last day of school. And so we were at this slumber party and late getting to sleep and everything, and didn't know about the tornado until morning. And our Girl Scout leader called us, and she said, "We're asking for your help, even as young as you are." And we all agreed we would. We were all in the Senior Scouts at that time. So they sent us to St. Mary's. And one of the basic things we did was fix bandages. They needed bandages, millions, thousands of them really. So we did a lot of folding of bandages. We were allowed to go into some of the rooms and take food and water. And I won't mention some of the things that us young girls had to see, but we were able to do it, and we did that for 2-3 days, and the nuns were so wonderful to work with, and they kept us out of rooms that they didn't want us in, but we felt like we did what we could do, and I forgot about the little girl until she mentioned it, because I remember we took up a fund for this little girl also, along with everybody, a lot of people. And as terrible as it is, none of us will ever forget it, and if we had a part of it. And my mother went over and helped in the Red Cross, and I didn't even get to see her, to speak to her about the occasion for several days, and we didn't talk about a lot of things. But anyway, that's the way my family and my Girl Scout friends helped in this way, and I'm glad we did. But we were only 14 and a half, so it was quite an experience for us. But anyway, thank you to anybody that did anything for them. We also took up a fund as a Girl Scout troop, and I'm proud we did it.
I'm proud of you standing up and telling the story. I'm proud that you were. Someone else do a story? Oh, good, Sarah. This is Sarah Keeley Setscorn.
She wasn't.
I have a question.
Oh, question?
Anyone here was in the tornado?
Oh.
Linda Shelton, is that what the letter you read? Do you remember the map of the tornado path? It kind of went up around Udall, and then it kind of dotted off that way. Well, that's where I was, one of those dots. And it took the barn, the chicken house, and the barn came through the living room wall over my grandmother, who was staying with us. And she come walking through the house, and of course all the windows were blown out, glass and plaster everywhere. And her bare feet, she came walking over and said, "There's plaster falling on me." And my dad was holding the kitchen door, trying to keep it closed. It was blowing so hard. And my mom had my older brother and I sitting on a bed in front of a window that hadn't blown out yet, just hoping she had her arms around both of us and thinking, okay, if they take us, she'll hold on to us. That would not have happened, but it did not blow out. why we didn't know. Why didn't we get under the bed? Just sitting on top of the bed. Anyway, for some strange reason, I walked from that little bedroom off the kitchen over to my dad, who was holding that door closed. And my dad was the most gentle, soft-spoken man I know, except if he ever got upset. Then his voice just boomed. I mean, it was loud. And I walked up to him and he yelled at me and he said, "Go back to your mother." And I, so obedient child I was, once in a while, I went back, and then halfway there I turned around to look at him and he was still yelling, but I couldn't hear it. The noise, the train, was so loud you couldn't hear anything. We were fortunate. We'd been down in the basement with my grandmother, elderly, but for some reason we came back up, and then it hit. So I know a lot of people I went to school with, and I wish I knew who the little girl was that had the foot.
I know, I wish I
I
did
wonder
too.
if she's still there. It might have been Connie, but that's beside the point. I went to school with a lot of kids that had a lot of injuries from the storm, and a lot of kids who weren't there that should have been there. But I had an aunt, 2 uncles living in Udall. My one uncle was the marshal, Keeley. And I had another uncle that lived there, and an aunt, and my aunt was picked up by the tornado and thrown. I thought she was at work at the rest home, was my remembrance. They found her in a ditch. The first time they left her for dead. I mean, there was ambulances. It wasn't just ambulances, it was whoever had a vehicle that get people. Anyway, they left her for dead the first time because she was laying there with the tube before. And second time around, then they said, "Well, I think she's still alive." But they couldn't get her in the ambulance because the board was too long. They had to search for a toy saw, and found a toy saw, sawed off that 2x4 and got her in the ambulance, took her to Winfield, and all the wonderful nurses and doctors, everybody that helped. And they got her there, and I remember going to see her, my dad and I, we went to check on her, and all they could do, there was so much going on, they just had to wipe the mud off her face, which was swollen, to make sure that's who that was. But she lived a ripe old age. She died. So she was very, very lucky. And, when I was sitting on the bed in front of that window, I thought, gosh, Mom, the chickens are flying by. Well, it wasn't the chickens. It might have been some of them. But the bedroom I slept in had a dresser drawer that we had linens and sheets in. And the storm had, of course, broken the window out and had pulled open the drawers and was sucking those sheets out the window, flying by on the same side of the house we were on. I thought that was weird. Anyway, those are some of my recollections.
Thank you, Sarah.
Anybody else want to share?
I have a question.
She's Sarah Keeley Sescorn.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody know whether Winfield High School, 1955, was graduated that day? Was that a graduation day?
Yes.
Does
I
anybody
think it
know?
was. I think that's why we were having
They
the summer
said yes, that
party.
was graduation day. The 25th or the 26th? The 25th,
Well, it was the night of the tornado.
then the 25th. Okay.
25th.
Yeah, I think so. That's why we were having a
I,
summer party.
somebody had said that it was the night of graduation, and I kept thinking, they heard about it at graduation. Graduation was still going on at 11 at night.
We found out afterwards.
So I did a search online on the Courier to see when the Winfield graduation was that year. And in one single article, it had 2 different dates for the Winfield. It was giving the list of dates for all the local graduations, all the little towns around from Wellington to Sedan, everywhere around. And in one place it said graduation at Winfield was the 25th. And then in another place in the very same article, it had it for Saturday that week. So if you say it was that day, then Mary Ellen says it was that day, it was that day.
You argue with me.
Who else can share?
Yeah.
Laura Unger.
Talking about
Something to
Leota's
share.
parents. For Leota,
I was about
Leota Evans.
Oh,
in our
yeah.
class. That's who they were talking about.
I was about 5 and a
Schmitz
half when the
picked them
tornado
up.
hit.
Oh,
We were
they're fabulous.
about 3 miles southeast of Udall. And my mom was in town at a meeting. My dad heard the winds and got us to the cave. At that time, there were just 3 of us. And my dad down in the cave. And then we heard wind really bad, and it made part of the shop just fold in. Our house was okay, and mostly what we had afterwards were debris from the tornado. But like I say, my mom was in town in Winfield, and so after her meeting, she drove back up 77 and I think K-15, no, yeah. But she wouldn't have gone up K-15. She would have gone up 77 to about the Akron Road. And during that time, she was seeing all kinds of sirens and hearing them and seeing the lights. And at one point, she was stopped, and that's when she found out that there had been a tornado up in the Udall area. So until she got home, she was really unsure how we were. So it was quite a relief. All of us kids never got to go up to Udall and see those things. They wanted to protect us from the sights that were so horrible. And it was a long, long time. I don't know how long before we did go up and see things that were being rebuilt and get active again in shopping up at Udall. My dad went up and that night and for several days helped with getting people into safety and taking them to the doctor and the hospital and cleaning things up. But one thing that he knew was that our neighbor's daughter was pregnant. And so he went along with our neighbor to find his daughter, and she had a board through her side. They got the board removed enough that they could take her by car into Winfield, and the baby was okay. So that was just my experience of memories on what has been going on at that time in my life.
You gotta know, every time a dark cloud came over, they were afraid for a long time, every time. Anybody else?
And Udall was known as after the storm and rebuilding of Udall, there were a lot of cellars and basements and places to go for the storms. And there was a big sign outside of Udall that said, Udall, America's safest city.
Sure did, yeah.
Anybody else?
Good. Do you mind if I don't know how many of you have read the book, if you have. And you mentioned where Udall didn't want to talk about it. I mean, I went to school there through my sophomore year afterwards, and it's like, I guess we just didn't talk about it. But Bobby Atkinson, who's one of the guys there in the book, we both spent 8 years on the Board of Education for Udall, and not once did I ever know he went through anything like that. And my kids went to school with his kids until I read the book, you know. I was just amazed. That really shocked me.
He was at St.
Veterans of War did that, and Veterans of the Udall Tornado did that too, didn't they? Anybody else?